All right, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all, and welcome to the side sessions of the third UN South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights. So this session will focus on reimagining the return and reintegration of migrant workers in South Asia, a business and human rights perspective in the context of COVID-19. This will be hosted by ILO India and IOM India. This is one of the several side sessions leading up to the plenary forum happening from March 28th to 30th in Dhaka, Bangladesh. A note that this session is being recorded and we are also live on YouTube. So before we start, I have two things for us to keep in mind during the session. The first one is we would love to see you. So if you're asking a question or speaking during the session, please do turn on your webcam. The next one is you could post questions or comments into the chat if you can use the raise hand function. Moderating today's session will be Mr. Shabanath Moore, Labor Immigration Specialist for South Asia, International Labor Organization, ILO. The floor is now yours.
Thanks a lot, Aya. Much appreciated and great work by Team Tandemic for all the support from your side. And an absolute pleasure to have everybody here for this very timely discussion on reintegration, particularly in the context of South Asia, but keeping in mind that this is the South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights. There's a whole range of issues associated to why reintegration is important from a business and human rights perspective, specifically in the South Asian context. And that is what we are going to explore over the course of the next 1.5 hours of this discussion. Over the last couple of years, we have seen conversations on reverse migration like we have never seen before in history. And what do I mean by that? In the context of South Asia, most migrant workers, now there are about, they say anywhere between 45 to 50 million migrant workers from South Asia working in different parts of the world. Majority of them work in the Middle East. From India alone, there are over 18 million migrant workers. And out of those 18 million, close to 9 million or over 9 million, over half of that migrant worker population are based out of the 6 Gulf Cooperation Council countries. In fact, it was during the beginnings of the COVID pandemic that the ILO decided to launch monitoring reports in terms of how livelihoods, what started off as a health crisis, started affecting livelihoods. And the ILO decided to launch monitoring reports periodically to see how the different regions were being affected. One of the things that we noticed, perhaps very early on at the start of the pandemic, was with regards to the loss of jobs and livelihoods in the Middle East. In fact, the ILO monitoring report at the time said that there was a forecast of a loss of jobs of close to 8 million. Approximately 8 million jobs were expected to be lost in the Arab states right at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic. If 8 million jobs were to be lost at the time in the Arab states, and majority of migrant workers from South Asia were working in the Middle East, who do you really think would be losing those jobs? Or who would have been the most affected as a result of the loss of those jobs? In fact, it's very clear for a lot of us, the first to be fired and the last to be hired are migrant workers. Keeping that in mind, there was a whole range of things that exploded as a result of COVID in the migration scenario. And with that, we saw some of the largest returns, or what I initially called reverse migration, of people back to their countries of origin. In fact, one of the first movements that we saw was in the context of Bangladesh. Bangladesh, we heard that there were news reports at the time saying that over 500,000, so close to 500,000 migrant workers or migrants were expected to return to Bangladesh within a few months of COVID hitting everybody. India alone saw the largest repatriation exercise that we have ever seen in history of Indian migrants, and particularly migrant workers, again, a majority of them from the Middle East, being returned through perhaps one of the biggest repatriation exercises that we have seen in history, the Vande Bharat mission. And up to now, if I'm not mistaken, and we will hear from the Indian speaker as well about the facilitation through this Vande Bharat mission of over 9 million migrants just from India. Now, this is tremendous. There's a whole range of things, therefore, associated to the importance of this return. But this also meant that a lot of these migrants were coming back to their countries of origin and countries which were in tatters themselves with regards to labor markets, with regards to social reintegration. How many of us experienced and saw people, we heard of people who coming back were being blamed by their own communities for being the carriers of infection. In what way then did we necessarily take into consideration the human rights element of these people who were returning to their countries of origin? Reintegration, therefore, cuts across a range of issues. It cuts across labor markets and jobs and social protection and issues around social and psychosocial and health related aspects, reintegration into their communities, reintegration into their own households. So it goes down right, it goes right down to that level of integration back into their communities. For the longest of periods, we had inquired and we had checked about the possibilities about how reintegration was being dealt with as far as definitions were concerned. In fact, in 2021, the UN Network on Migration, the UN Global Network on Migration, released a paper on reintegration. And in that, they defined sustainable reintegration as such. And I quote here, it says, "There is no universally accepted legal definition of sustainable reintegration, but for the purposes of this paper, sustainable reintegration can be understood as a process which enables individuals to secure and sustain the political, economic, social, and psychosocial conditions needed to maintain life, livelihood, and dignity in the country and community they return or are returned to, in full respect of their civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights." The definition then goes on to state, this should include targeted measures that enable returning migrants to have access to justice, social protection, financial services, healthcare, education, family life, an adequate standard of living, decent work, and protection against discrimination, stigma, arbitrary detention, and all forms of violence. And that allows returnees to consider that they are in an environment of personal safety, economic empowerment, inclusion, and social cohesion upon return. It was important to state this because this gets us to understand the complexity that is reintegration of migrant workers. And if we understand the economies of South Asia, if we understand the social fabric of the countries, that the 8 countries in South Asia, we will better begin to be humbled by how much more difficult it is to reintegrate. And then keep in mind that businesses have an important role to play, particularly in the context of labor market reintegration. But while ensuring that reintegration happens in the labor markets, taking in the role of social partners as a whole, trade unions, other stakeholders like civil society organizations, in terms of ensuring that this reintegration happens with a human rights-based approach. One of the things that we will also have to keep in mind is that very soon, the Global Compact for Migration, the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, which was adopted in December 2018, will be reviewed. And when the GCM is reviewed, the GCM will take into consideration at the International Migration Review Forum, the IMRF in less than a couple of months, in May this year, it will take into consideration a whole range of aspects. One of them is Objective 21 on sustainable reintegration. So there's a whole range of things that we need to discuss today, and I have some amazing panelists and speakers who have a variety of perspectives that they will come with. The first that I would like to introduce you to the audience present here is Dr. Nasheed. Dr. Nasheed is the Deputy Secretary from the Ministry of Expatriates Welfare and Overseas Employment from the government of Bangladesh. I have had the opportunity of being in different meetings with Dr. Nasheed, and I have not, I've always ranked Dr. Nasheed as one of those people with a very strong passion and commitment for the rights of migrant workers, particularly in the context of Bangladesh. And we couldn't have had a better speaker than Dr. Nasheed to start us off on this conversation. Dr. Nasheed is also somebody who has been very actively involved at the regional level through the discussions of the Colombo process, the Abu Dhabi dialogue, even in the national and regional discussions of the Global Compact for Migration. So there's a whole range of things here that we can expect to hear from Dr. Nasheed. Dr. Nasheed, your time starts now. I understand that you are also participating literally from the middle of another meeting. So really big thanks to you and gratitude for joining us along these lines. Dr. Nasheed, you have the floor. Your 8 minutes start now, please.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure and honor to join the panel discussions on realizing the effective reintegration of migrant workers in South Asia in the context of COVID-19. In today's session, I would like to highlight the initiatives and best practices of the government of the People's Republic of Bangladesh regarding reintegration issue and how we are addressing the challenges of reintegration issue. At first, I would like to highlight why reintegration of migrant workers is needed. You know that migrant workers work in overseas countries, country of destinations, leaving behind their family members in the country of origins. They send their hard-earned money, which helps the economy of the country of origins, as it happens in Bangladesh. During the COVID-19, Bangladesh government has received $25 billion, which is even 36% higher than the last year. We received this amount this year. However, during the pandemic, around 400,000 migrant workers came back in Bangladesh, losing their job, being affected by coronavirus. Many of them suffered from wage theft. Many of them were forced to come back before completing their contract of jobs. Many of them didn't get the proper salaries. And a lot of migrant workers were ready to travel to their country of destinations where they were employed. However, they couldn't go back due to COVID-19 pandemic situation. So the issue or phenomena of reintegration came into focus during the pandemic situation and after that, or I should not say after, because still there is the impact of COVID-19. Now, how to reintegrate the returning migrant workers? This is the most important aspect. We know the problems of reintegration. However, all the countries of South Asia are facing the challenges of how to reintegrate the huge number of migrant workers who are coming back to their home countries. I must say that it is not only the responsibility of the respective government. Reintegration is a very complex issue. It starts from the migration cycle beginning of the migration cycle and it ends at the completion of the migration cycle. So I should say that it is the approach the government is taking, the whole of government approach and the whole of society approach. Without the collaboration with the with different ministries, government agencies, international organizations, development partners, national and non-government organizations, civil society organizations, and private sectors, it is difficult to address the challenges of reintegration. So I again emphasize that the government of Bangladesh has taken the government, whole of government and whole of society approach to solve the issues regarding reintegration. I would like to highlight a little bit quickly on the international and national frameworks on reintegration issue. We know that our Sustainable Development Goals has the target 10.7.1, 10.7, which says about migration and reintegration as well. Now, the National 8 5-year plan of Bangladesh, we do have 10 agendas. Among the 10 agendas, we have a specific agenda on reintegration of returning migrant workers. And we have developed a number of legal and policy frameworks. And we are amending and revising our legal and policy frameworks to give importance on reintegration issue. For example, we had Overseas Employment and Migrant Acts, which is the mother acts for migration governance. That act was enacted in 20th and 13. Now we are going to amend and revise this act. We are going to incorporate reintegration workers in this act. I am actually currently looking over the law formulation desk of the Ministry of Expatriates, Welfare and Overseas Employment. So very much involved amendment. We have Wage Earners Welfare Board Act 2018. This act has very specifically said about the return and reintegration of migrant workers. We are going to formulate Wage Earners Welfare Board rules in order to implement the Wage Earner Welfare Board Act. And in these rules, we are going to incorporate a separate chapter on reintegration of the returning migrant workers. And then finally, I am very much happy to share with you that the government of Bangladesh is going to formulate a comprehensive national reintegration policy for migrants 2022 in collaboration with the technical support of ILO, IOM, and UN Women. We started this process in October last year, and we are very happy to say that we are working so quickly and so intensively so that we will be able to formulate the policy by May. Within these 4 or 5 months after hard work, we have already got the zero draft on the reintegration policy, and the government has decided that this policy should be for the migrants, not only for the migrant workers and not only for the legal migrant workers, irrespective of their legal status. We are going to formulate the policy for all the migrants of Bangladeshi nationals so that they will be benefited from this policy. In October, under the leadership of the Honorable Minister of the Ministry of Expatriates, Welfare and Overseas Employment, we had a stakeholders meeting, including ILO, IOM, UN Women, and other international and national organizations. We have taken 12 decisions at that meeting in order to formulate this policy. And most important decision was to formulate a working committee to work on reintegration issue. And we are happy that we have develop that committee, and I am working as a focal point in that committee as well. Meanwhile, we have carried out three divisional consultation, including in Dhaka, in Chattogram, and in Sylhet division, in order to incorporate the feedback, comments, and recommendations from the local level and regional level of Bangladesh, and to listen to the migrant workers, what they are thinking about their reintegration. And 3 consultants have been commissioned to help to develop the zero draft, and we have already got the first zero draft, and we are expecting that by end of April, we will get the first draft, and then we will work on that to develop the policy. Now, I would like to share with you some of other supports.
Dr. Nasheed, Dr. Nasheed, could you come? Dr. Nasheed, could you conclude because you're already over time?
Oh, okay, fine. Okay, so just very briefly that Bangladesh government has extended various type of financial support, including loans and cash support. And another thing, we have got a very big project in collaboration with the World Bank. That project is called Recovery and Advancement of Informal Sector of Migrant Workers, Reintegration of Returning Migrant Workers. And we have already established a reintegration center for the returning migrant workers. And we are also going to establish a modern hospital and diagnostic center for the returning migrant workers. So it is really difficult to share the best practices to highlight only in 7 minutes. However, I'm very much happy to say something about what my government and my ministry is doing. And I would like to thank all of you again. And I would, at the same time, please pardon me, I would have to take leave from you just right now. So I cannot take part in the question, answer, and rest of the session. Thank you very much.
Dr. Nasheed, thank you so very much. And I'm so glad you were able to put some of these perspectives forward. Before you go, I said reintegration is complex, but that it will be possible only or effective, take into consideration only if it starts from the beginning of the migration cycle all the way up to the end. So very important. When you speak about wage theft, for instance, this is something that we constantly speaker. Without any further ado, I understand that my voice is breaking up a lot, so I'm going to try and reconnect. But before that, I give the floor to Ms. Surabhi Singh, Dr. Surabhi Singh, who is the Chief Administrative Officer of the India Center for Migration, which is a think tank of the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. Dr. Surabhi Singh has been perhaps one of the preeminent personalities, and I say this with absolutely no qualms there, with all the sincerity I can muster. Over the last 2 years, Surabhi has really led the conversations from the front, of course, under the aegis of the Ministry of External Affairs, in the context of bringing stakeholders together through the whole of government and whole of society approach, like what Dr. Nasheed mentioned, and get dialogues opened on various issues. And I've lost count, Surabhi, of the number of times reintegration has been brought up in different areas of conversation. Surabhi, over to you.
Thank you, Shabri. Thank you for your kind words, and good afternoon to everyone present here. I also thank the organizers for having invited me to join today's deliberations. As Shabri pointed out in his opening remarks, that sustainable reintegrations depends on a range of factors. And from amongst the many factors listed, I pick on 2, which is access to livelihood and dignity for returnees to be able to integrate successfully into the societies to which they return to. And in my intervention, what I'll be doing is to focus really on the efforts which the Ministry of External Affairs has taken for enabling the successful reintegration of returning migrants. So we at ME, we step back for a step further from reintegration and actually look at the process of return. And when in March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic really struck the world and disrupted the economic flows across the world, one of the first thoughts was to how to bring our people back. And that actually led to the Vande Bharat mission. Sabri also alluded to the VBM in his opening remarks. And currently the Vande Bharat mission is in its 16th phase. Close to 60,000 flights have operated under the aegis of this mission to bring back our people. And if one analyzes the Vande Bharat figures, it's half and half. So inbound traffic is as much as the outbound traffic. So it's not just people coming back, but now we also see people going back to the countries from where they came back when the COVID-19 first struck. Also, in consonance with Vande Bharat mission, another initiative which the Ministry of External Affairs actively collaborated on with another ministry in India, which is the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, is the Swadesh initiatives. Swadesh would stand for Skilled Worker Arrival Database for Employment Support. And it was launched after a great deal of deliberations. And when it was being launched, a whole range of thoughts went into the process of what sort of data should be collected, how the portal should look like, what questions should be asked to the migrants, whether to make it voluntary or mandatory, which ministry should take the lead. So a whole range of deliberations went into the making of the Swadesh portal, and currently it's being run by the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. And if you look at some example from the portal itself, about the 30,500 people, for instance, who registered in January, about 24,000 people already went back. They returned to the GCC countries. So you see the more than 50% people who registered with the portal actually went back. And now Swadesh registrations have also been integrated with another portal of the Ministry of Skill Development, which is called the ASEEM portal. ASEEM is Atmanirbhar Skilled Employer Employee Mapping Portal. There are employers present and then employees present as well. What it seeks to do is to match demand with supply. And about 800 plus employers are there. More than 500 job vacancies have been raised on the portal. So the idea is to bring the two sides together through this portal. Another portal which the Ministry of External Affairs itself operates is the eMigrate portal. Even though initially it was focused to the Gulf Cooperation Council countries only, with the effort of the ministry in the last 2 years specifically has to open up it to more countries. So an agreement, for instance, that we signed with the government of Japan on specified skilled worker, that information has also been put out on the eMigrate portal. ECNR registrations have been opened up on the eMigrate portal. And going forward, the idea is to make eMigrate a single window of information of all sorts of overseas employment opportunities. So that would serve as a route for people to become aware about the kind of employment opportunities that are there. Another mechanism through which there is facilitation of employment opportunity is through the institutional frameworks, through the labor manpower agreements and the migration mobility partnership agreements. Right now, there are 12 MMPAs and NMPAs, and a similar number of MMPAs are in negotiations with Australia, with Greece, with Germany, with Japan, with Slovenia, Andorra, Iceland, and the list goes on. So the idea is to open up more destinations for employment of our people. And the government, for instance, in the case of Portugal, is a labor manpower agreement. It has recently been ratified by both sides and will come into operation. So going forward, you will see that eMigrate will have a tab on Portugal and the kind of employment opportunity one would see with respect to Portugal, and then recruiters can take on the demand and then fill those vacancies which are raised by the Portuguese side. Apart from this, awareness generation plays a key role. So many a times people are not able to access employment opportunities about, for instance, because of lack of information. So a whole range of awareness generation initiatives have been taken place. MEA has actually taken a lead in reaching out to the state government and in making them aware about the new agreements being entered into by the government, also informing them about newer opportunities that we see in emerging destinations. And in the month of October to December, a high-level delegation led by Secretary himself reached out to various states of India to actually engage with state governments, because eventually reintegration measures will only be successful if state governments are also roped in those efforts. So the idea was to include all linkages from the central to the state ministries in this whole process of reintegration. Knowledge about all these opportunities only comes from assessment. So labor market assessments are being done by ICM. We have two projects, one with the European Union under the Common Agenda on Migration and Mobility, labor market study, social protections, access to social security agreements. All those kinds of studies were done under CAM. Further, we have another project with IOM India, under which as well we have a labor market component where labor market assessments of 3 selected countries will be done. Also a specified study on the geriatric care sector. So the idea behind these initiatives is not just to open up domestic opportunities for our people, but also look at remigration and send them abroad as well. So the idea is to complete the circuit so that there are initiatives at the domestic level, but we also open up new avenues and new destinations for our people. Only then will the whole cycle of reintegration be complete. So the role of the government in this process has been to create an enabling environment, but we have regularly engaged with private players as well through our various panel discussions, through the development of various modules and studies. For instance, in the case of the module that we developed on Japan, we actually reached out to the people and the agencies which are already involved in recruitment of people to Japan under various initiatives, for instance, the technical intern training program. And we brought on the knowledge which exists with the private sector into development of our course material, but we also look upon the private sector to take advantage of these enabling environments and the framework which has been established by the government to actually take these opportunities for the people. Because it's very important that private sector also complements the efforts which are made by the government for enabling the reintegration of people within the country. So with that, I would say that reintegration encompasses a whole range of issues, but within the mandate of Ministry of External Affairs, access to employment opportunity and ensuring dignity and decent work in those employment opportunities has been the key. I think I'll stop there. I hope I did not exceed my time. If there are any questions, I'll answer within the next half an hour.
Thank you so much, Surabhi. Really appreciate that. And I think, just to point out on a few things, when you started speaking about the coordination with Ministry of Skills, apart from the Vande Bharat Mission coordination, which included MEA, Civil Aviation, Health, and all the other ministries there, then with Ministry of Skills, the ASEAN process, Swades, MEA's e-migrate, all of that. It's a combination of many things, isn't it? It goes back to the point that Dr. Nasheed was making with regards to the fact that whole of government approach is one going to be very important in reintegration. More importantly, what you have also done is used technology as effectively as possible in this context. And I think e-migrate is a very good example of that, something that we keep hearing in the context of a good example and a good practice from South Asia. I mean, the MMPAs, for instance, that also goes to show that countries of destination and the bilateral labor migration agreements, however you call it in the context of India, also play an important role for reintegration. So that means reintegration is not just the responsibility of country of origin, but it is an overall migration process perspective that we need to take into consideration, keeping in mind the role of country of destination as well. And the last point that you mentioned, of course, among the many points you mentioned, one last one from my side is where you speak about it will be successful only if state governments are effectively included. I mean, we're talking about India with all its states. In the context of Bangladesh, we're talking about a country with 64 districts and subsequent divisions. And we heard about Dr. Nasheed talking about how they did divisional level consultations. So what you're doing at the state level is what Bangladesh has been doing at the district and the divisional level. That also goes to show once again that reintegration has to go all the way down, has to percolate. It's not something that only central government alone can do. So this is all fantastic. I mean, in the end, you spoke about the role of private sector, the access to employment opportunities, decent work, dignity of labor, and all of that. What better segue can there be than those points to bring in Mr. Prasad from the Employers Federation of Ceylon? Mr. Prasad, who I have known for the last couple of years, has been an absolute treasure of a resource for us to understand the employer's perspective, particularly in the context of Sri Lanka. I think also what makes Sri Lanka very interesting is that it is the only country thus far which has a policy on reintegration, a sub-policy on reintegration associated to its national labor migration policy. It is also important for us to recognize exactly what Dr. Nasheed said, that now as a result of COVID, we see a number of other governments also taking this into consideration. So Bangladesh is now ready to finalize, and it's in the process of finalizing their own reintegration policy for migrant workers. Without further ado, Mr. Prasad, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sabri. Surabhi was spot on when she mentioned that the private sector has to complement the efforts of the government. True that the responsibility lies with the government, because it's the government who makes policy decisions as to how the migration takes place and all that is there. And let me start by saying Sri Lanka is not only a sending country. It's we have a fair number of migrant workers working in our country as well, which means even though we are talking about unemployment, we have jobs for people. I mean, it's a case of having people for jobs and jobs for people. So identifying their skills on their return becomes very important so that the employers can effectively reintegrate them. For this purpose, the Employers Federation of Ceylon, along with the International Labour Organization, introduced this skill passport, because that is digitalizing their experience. It's a 100% online platform. Of course, in the country, we have the TVEC, that is Tertiary and Vocational Education Commission, which awards the national vocational qualifications, the NVQs. So NVQ has a different unit to look into this skills passport. That is like I said, it's 100% online platform. People have to have NVQ qualification, whatever the level, and 1 year's experience in order for them to be eligible to participate in the system. And thereafter, they'll be achieving the points on their return of the experience that they have gained working in other countries. Of course, this was started very much earlier than the pandemic hit globally. But then it became very effective after the pandemic, because we had compared to other countries, we had a lesser workforce, migrant workforce, but still they contribute a lot to the economy, and that one time used to be our #1 foreign revenue earner. And we had about 80,000 of them returning after the COVID pandemic broke out, and about 100,000 of them waiting But of course, like mentioned by the previous speakers, some of them have gone back, and that is there. So the data becomes a very important aspect, because since the collection of data is important, and also it's not practically very easy to do that. It's a very challenging thing. What Sri Lanka has done is, at every divisional secretariat, there is a development officer, and they have voluntarily gone and gathered information from the returnees with regard to their experience, so on and so forth. So the employers are the Employers Federation of Ceylon, where I am working, where I am attached to, is the National Employee Organization, and they are quite positive. They are prepared to re-employ these people on their return. So for them to recognize their skill, the recognition of prior learning has become very important, and that is why we came up with this idea, the National Skill Passport. We have quite a few government bodies involved. It is the Ministry of Foreign Employment, and especially the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment. As I mentioned, the TVEC, Tertiary and Vocational Education Commission, and all these agents, all these government bodies are involved in this. So coordination, therefore, becomes quite a challenge, since there are so many entities involved in this. In whatever the context, whatever the challenges that may be, the advertising has been, happening, and it has been well received. The response has been quite positive from the returnee migrants themselves, as well as the employers. So there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm created, and a lot of people are waiting for the recognition to be done through this skill passport. And I think it's a very good way forward, where the employers need to recognize the pre-learning of the returning migrant workers. So it was quite impressive to note, reading the concept note, the Swades, that is skilled workers arrival database for employment support system in India. I think it's a fantastic, since we are talking of digitalization and all that, I think it's much more effective than, going after people collecting data like that happens in Sri Lanka. As I mentioned, the development officers attached to each divisional secretariat do that on a rather voluntary basis. And if there are collection of data like Swades, I think that would have been a much easier way of launching into the next phase of skills passport. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other. And as an employee organization, once again, I can reiterate, the employers are very positive. They are prepared to recognize the skills and offer them employment, thereby facilitating the reintegration of the returning migrant workers to the, once again, in the country of origin. So with that, I think I can stop there. Probably I have got a few minutes left, and I'd be happy to take questions, if any, from the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prasad. I think this perspective that you have brought about will certainly evoke a lot of questions. And so we have time in the discussion. So the time that you have given will actually help us through the discussion itself. And sometimes I just like to reiterate some of these points, because they are so evident. For instance, some of the points that you made, what I think about it, Mr. Prasad, and correct me if I'm wrong, my immediate thinking is to also say, At the end of the day, when a migrant worker returns to his or her own country of origin, that person is no more a migrant worker. That
Exactly.
person is now back to being the citizen of their country in their own country,
Exactly.
right? A national returning to their country. So therefore, employment policies in general, which the EFC in Sri Lanka is very engaged in, should address in all people, including migrant workers. So this is a broader employment policy issue, which should take into consideration the needs of returnee migrant workers.
Exactly.
The skills passport example is perfect. I mean, this is something that we were very glad to have worked with you on. Glad this has now been about over a year that the skills passport has been adopted by the government of Sri Lanka, and so important in terms of the role that the EFC has done. Can I add a South Asia perspective to it? This has become so important now that the government of Pakistan and the Employers Federation of Pakistan wants to do it, and they want to learn from you, which we hope we will be able to do in a couple of months by bringing a delegation to Sri Lanka and learn from you. So that peer-to-peer exchange is so crucial in this. The point that you made, for instance, in the context of RPL, the point that you make in the context of how important Swadesh is and so on, all of this very important. Thank you so much, Mr. Prasad. I really appreciate it. That brings me to your counterpart, the trade unions. Amongst our social partners, both the employers and the trade unions are important social partners and constituents of the ILO. That brings me to Brother Ratan, Brother Razekuzzaman Ratan. Brother Ratan is a trade union leader from Bangladesh with the NCCWE, has been so very active as a leader in this position, has been passionate in his commitment and fight, along with other trade unions around South Asia in the context of migrant workers' rights. There's a whole range of issues that I know Brother Ratan will bring in, particularly now the human rights aspect. And I know this is something that Brother Ratan is very passionate about. Brother Ratan, without further ado, look forward to hearing from you along the same lines of the points that you made very passionately at yesterday's roundtable session here on fair recruitment in Bangladesh, where I had the opportunity of listening to you in person. Brother Ratan, over to you, sir. Your 8 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Sabri. First, I apologize that my English is not so good. So you have the passions to hear me and to not by word, but by heart. And I'm trying to express myself and the experience which we gathered from the reintegration process in our country. Reintegration is a complex issue. So we need a comprehensive approach about reintegration. When a worker goes abroad as a migrant worker, at the same time, he or she think about his or her future life. Someday he will come back to his own country and he or she will live with his experiences, with his or her earnings. In our country, every day migrants are coming back. And through papers that every day 14 to 15 dead body of workers coming back in our country. It is countable, but we did not count how many are coming back with their lost breed. And after coming back, how they are integrated in our society with their family, and what will they do for their future. So it is a psychosocial problem. It is sometimes a humanitarian process, and sometimes they lead in conditions, and they are sometimes feel escapist attitude towards from his family and from his friend circles also. But if we close our eyes, the problems will not wash away. So we think about the problems before and after migration. before migration, there is a skill gap in our country. Our workers are going abroad with limited skills. And when they work abroad, they earn some skill. And when they come back, what they do with their skill in our country. So in two way, skill gap is existing when they're going abroad and when they're coming back. So reintegration process must address about this skill gap. But we know that manpower is the ultimate power for production and consumption also. But when a worker loses his work, he not only loses his work, he lost his dream also. Not only lose his money which is invested for migration, but the time, the youth, sometimes we termed it is the youth trading of our country. We are selling our dreams, we are sending our youths, we are receiving the hopeless persons when they lose their jobs abroad and coming back with empty hands. So these problems should be addressed. And our country must notice about that after coming back, they could create pressure on labor market, not only labor market, in our food market also. 13 million, almost 13 million workers are, migrants are abroad. If they come back to Bangladesh, there is a huge pressure on our food security, our education sectors, and our health sectors, and so on, so on. So our government should take the initiative about these peoples who sends their money for their own families, but they sends the foreign money, which increases our foreign reserves and which help for our national economy also. So our country should address their problems, and we must utilize their skills which are earned from abroad in construction sectors, in caregiving, in domestic work, in hotel caterings, and sometimes the returnee they can act as a trainer of the aspirant migrant training institutes also. But there are some challenges. We have no proper data who are coming back either forcefully or willingly. If they come back willingly with some money and with some experiences, how they utilize it and how can they integrate it in our society. There is no government scheme still. It is still personal initiative also. We don't know how what type of skills they have, and we don't know what type of supports they needed. And so how government and non-government organizations prepare a comprehensive plan for their livelihood, it is still unknown. So we are thinking about policies, and at the same time, we are thinking about that the Bangladesh is not only a labor sending country, it is a labor receiving country also. Almost 0.5 million migrant workers are working in our country. But the worker which are going abroad and the worker which are coming to our countries for work, there is a huge skill gap. Skilled workers are coming in our country, and unskilled and low skilled. Unskilled is not a proper term, but low skilled workers are going back to abroad. There should be a national employment policy, national skill development policy, which can enrich and educate and give the proper skill for the workers. And we think also that a successful reintegration will helpful for further migration. The world is full of migrant workers. Our development is dependent on migrant workers also, not only in Middle East, but in developed country. The development needed some workers, cheap labor power, low skilled labor power. Sometimes we call them odd jobs. These are done by the migrant workers. But without this odd job, the society cannot run smoothly. So governments of sending and governments of receiving, both governments should take responsibilities for the migrants and integration and reintegration process. Civil society and trade unions will work hand in hand for the workers who lose their hopes, and we should stand by the side for their future. But it is not only depend on our past wish. It always needed a good plan, policy, support, sometimes financial supports, and sometimes policy supports also. So in our country, in COVID situation, huge number of migrants workers coming back. Government gives some loans for them, but you know, the loans in terms of money is not always helpful for proper reintegration. The proper way, proper scope, and proper institutional supports is needed also. So still, we are acting as charity-based activities. Not it is whole and comprehensive activities.
Ratan Bhai, could you conclude now?
No, I almost completed my issues, but I think Bangladesh government is not ignoring the migrant workers, but there should be a good policy also. We are talking about the migrant workers, but we are not taking their responsibilities properly. So
Right.
sometimes it is tall talk with low activities. So I must conclude my speech with hope that migrant workers, when they are in abroad, they are thinking about their countries, they are taking responsibilities for their families. But when they come back to countries, our country, our society will not take responsibility for them. It is not only humanitarian approach, it is a national responsibility also, it is a social responsibility also, and it is for further migration also.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you very much, Ratan Bhai. Really appreciate that. You know, you started by saying, please don't take my word, listen to my heart. I'll tell you this, everybody here, everybody, and this is being live streamed on YouTube, every word and your heart has been taken into account, every word. So I would, you know, if I were to repeat things that you said, I would just not be doing justice to the heart that you used in saying it, you know, whether it is the psychosocial problems, the humanitarian problems, the human conditions, the escapist attitudes that migrants have to face, family and friends, whole range of issues that you brought up there. Thank you very much for being the human rights champion that you are. Really appreciate these inputs. That brings me to my next speaker, Professor Bhagat. Yesterday, I was on a webinar with him, and I introduced him with one word 3 times, and that word is humble, humble, humble. Professor Bhagat is the head of migration with the International Institute for Population Sciences based out of Mumbai, India. And he's also head of the secretariat that leads the Salam Knowledge Hub. The Salam Knowledge Hub is the South Asia Labor Migration Hub, Knowledge Hub, which has been supported by ILO, IOM, and UN Women. Professor Bhagat, over to you, sir.
Thank
Your 8
you,
minutes now.
Sabri, for nice words introducing me. And I also thank Amit for contacting and inviting me. And it's a important forum to share some of my views. So as we also discussed yesterday, that Global Compact for Migration is with 23 objectives is a very comprehensive document which is well-founded theoretically, philosophically, and it is rooted in history of United Nations, various conventions like Universal Declaration of Human Rights, various ILO conventions, and of course, Sustainable Development Goals. And when we talk about return migration and its reintegration, the objective 21 is very important to highlight and discuss, which says that cooperate in facilitating safe and dignified return and readmission, as well as sustainable reintegration. In that respect, right to emigrate, I think is some sort of a very important human right, and that also is accompanied with a right to choose an employment overseas, and it is also part of right to emigrate is also part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was adopted by United Nations in 1948. But one can leave the country, but one cannot enter the country. So there is a right to emigrate, but there is no right to immigrate. So in that respect, if you see that how this right to emigrate could be fulfilled or realized without having right to return to our own country, to the respective workers' own country. And in that respect, I would like to stress here, and yesterday also I stressed this point, that this should be accompanied with right to leave the job. And that is very important in the context where there is some sort of forced labor or some sort of compulsion to continue the job under the kafala system or from various other conditions. So therefore, there is a need to empower our migrant workers. And this is the perspective from the origin country. Because the destination countries are sovereign countries, and they have also right to implement their own policies and program. But then origin countries can take certain initiatives, and some of the initiatives like e-migrate or other things, I think, to be looked into in that respect, how technology can be leveraged to empower our migrant workers and they can realize their human rights fully. So I would like to stress that dignified return is a precondition for sustainable reintegration. Unless the worker returns in a dignified way, I think that demoralizes them and their agency, and it has repercussion on health and various aspects of their capability in integrating with the origin society at the origin areas. Another important thing is that when we look at this return migrants and migrants also as such, neither migrants nor return migrants are a homogeneous category. That we have to realize. and what type of heterogeneity is there, whether in terms of age or gender or skills or other aspects. That is, I think, very important for targeting inclusion for sustainable integration. In that respect, we have been discussing a lot in any forum. We always say there is a dearth of data. And of course, we have dearth of data. But some of the study, and that dearth of data, we need to address it. In that respect, I would like to present before you what is the extent to which those who are emigrating are returning to our country. And this is a situation, this is the data which I am presenting, is a situation during the normal times. What happens during the normal years, how the return takes place, and what has happened during the distress time. So COVID is something one can treat as a time of distress. So what do we find? I'm giving data from 3 surveys. One is the National Sample Survey that was conducted 2007 and 2008, and after that, we didn't have data. That shows that every 100 person emigrates, about 30% returns. And so that is the NSSO data. We have done from IIPS, we have done a very big survey in Gujarat in 2012, and we find the results are very similar to that. 29% return to Gujarat out of 100, every 100% emigrated. We have recently, before COVID, we have recently done again a large scale survey in Eastern UP and Bihar, covering about 4,500 households. And that also shows that something 26%, those who are emigrating are returning. So this is how we have to see the estimates that return migrants are actually a large component, 1/4 to 1/3, it may go out of the total immigrants. And as the size of immigration increases, so will be the return migrants. And this hypothesis was given long back by E.G. Ravenstein at the close of the 19th century, that every stream of migration generates a counter stream. And so return migration is a counter stream. And in normal times, we expect that 1/4 to 1/3 of the people who are immigrating will return. What happened during COVID times? COVID times was a distress time, and some estimates shows that, for example, in Kerala, 1.3 million returned to Kerala between May 2020 to April 21, out of 2 million immigrants estimated to live abroad as per 2018. So this was something 2/3 return. So this was a very high number of immigrants returning, and 50% of those who return, they want to remigrate. And this has been vindicated in Surabhi's presentation, that yes, many people who registered in Swadesh, they have already remigrated. So these data are very important, and data is very important way of convincing the policymaker and important for policy decisions.
Bhagat sir, could you conclude?
Yeah, yes.
Thank you.
So you can see that immigration map, and this will be also showing the return migration, where the return migration. So return migrants are not equally distributed among different parts of India. But again, few states of India will have more return migrants. So this showing. Return migrants, we have to see from the life cycle approach. And what happens, those a large number of returnees who are coming after the age 60 or close to 60, those who are aged people. So there must be some life cycle approach to understand gender and age perspective, to have better understanding and complexity of return migration. And when we see mean age of migration, it is about 45 years. So these, I think, informations are important for making the policy decisions. And of course, the largest number of returnees are from Gulf countries. Everybody from the Gulf has to return. And so we find that 60% are returning from Gulf. Now, already this has been said about Vande Bharat and Swadesh and e-migrate. I will not like to touch all these things already said, but what I like to say that we are now getting a lot of data. What will be the data policy? Data policy, how this data can be utilized by the public or academia or researcher. And so that data policy is very important in order to, on the one hand, to protect the privacy of the migrant, and on the other hand, to promote research. And what we, in addition to that, what I would like to add, that several states of India is showing a different model of integration, reintegration. Kerala has, of course, one model where Norca or Kerala Pravasi Welfare Board doing wonderful job. We have Gujarat also, Gujarat model and Punjab model.
Sir, I'll have to kindly request.
Concluding. So we have Punjab model and Gujarat model where diasporas are engaged, and Gujarat having some sort of Gujarat Pravasi cards, and that are helpful in business purposes. So this is how our models are differently emerging, and so our integration perspective will also be not all India, but it will be very diverse in the context of the states of India. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Bhagat sir, really appreciate these perspectives. Data, that's the big one that you have highlighted here. I think, therefore, with the one word that I use 3 times for you, one word that I take from your presentation and mention it 3 times is data, 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 right? And how important is that? So from different perspectives, disaggregated data and a whole range of that. SDG Goal 17 means of implementation specifically talks about disaggregated data on migration, and particularly now in the context of returnees for effective reintegration. Perfect. That brings me to my final speaker, Sanjay Avasthi, the head of the Office for International Organization for Migration here in India. Sanjay, you have the floor.
Thank you, Shabri. It was indeed fascinating to see that excellent analysis, data analysis done by Professor Bhagat. And it gives us very unique insight into the flow of migrants. Coming back to this whole issue of reintegration, while many of the speakers, especially Mr. Ratan, Mr. Prasad, and others, and Surabhi from India have highlighted, I would focus on a few important aspects of the impact of COVID-19 on migrants, and then what is still considered to be a significant gap. And starting, since Professor Bhagat had already referred to the significance of data, that's something which even we at IOM have been recognizing, and that is why we are undertaking this initiative in partnership with the Government of India on migration data management frameworks. And just to give you a quick example, while especially for the low-skilled migrant workers, there is an excellent mechanism to gather data about the immigrants, the people who are going out of the country. But there is a much more to be required in terms of the returning migrants. And that is where the whole issue of reintegration comes into play. And we all recognize that socially, the migrant laborers, migrant workers have been the worst hit due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as migrant vulnerabilities have been exacerbated by increased insecurity, poverty, and marginalization. And on top of that, the migrants have been subjected to exploitation, abuse, stigmatization, and discrimination. And these experiences, along with the uncertainty of returning to one's community, greatly impacted their well-being and mental health. So many of the speakers referred to the whole issue of stigmatization. And I just wanted to add here that it's not just the stigma because of carriers of people's perception regarding the carriers of COVID-19, but also the stigma of returning because of a failure. And that is something which, in course of my personal interaction with many of these international returnee migrants in India, has demonstrated. Moreover, an analysis on gender has also shown that women migrants experience higher rates of abuse abroad and stigmatization upon return. And that also brings us to this whole issue of data about women migrants, which is really a need of the hour. And so I mean, underlining the fact that data is really important, and Professor Bhagat has already highlighted that, let me move on to some key examples where Professor Bhagat alluded to the initiatives taken by the government of Kerala, Department of Non-Resident Keralites Affairs, and the field agency Norca Roots, which focuses on offering financial assistance for returnees. Similarly, there have been many initiatives taken by other state governments, and I completely agree with some of the observations made earlier, that once the migrants, because it's a federal structure in India, once the migrant returns, then it becomes primarily the responsibility of state government. And with the help of the federal government, there are various avenues through which the international returnee migrants could be and put under focus. So just to give an example about more recent initiatives, like when a large number of migrant workers, not international, but internal, they returned to UP, one of the largest states. They returned from other states during the pandemic. The government of UP constituted a career counseling committee and a help desk at each district level for the psychosocial counseling and support of migrant workers of the state. So this is one of the key examples of the uniqueness of each state. And depending upon the local needs, context, and the perspectives, I agree with Professor Bhagat that these diversities would be respected and would certainly be here to stay. Coming to the area of reimagining return and reintegration, one of the risks identified in reintegration programs is the creation of inequalities. Inequalities reflect differences in what is offered to migrants and what is offered to non-migrants, as well as the quality gap. So further risk is to accentuate the inequalities already associated with migration, such as between regions that receive high levels of return migrant investment and those which do not. Just to give you an example, that right now, as per the latest figures, Bihar is the highest migrant sending state internationally from India. But if you juxtapose it with the initiatives being taken for reintegration, there is so much which can be done in these states. So the IOM approach acknowledges the reintegration to be a multidimensional process and aims at ensuring returnees' economic, social, and psychosocial well-being in their countries of origin. The economic dimension, including employment, income sources, debt, ownership of land or house, is seen as the core of reintegration. However, there is no single model for return and reintegration, and that's something which I alluded to by highlighting the uniqueness of various state initiatives. The central coordinating mechanisms of partnerships or state-led models depend on a range of factors, including the institutional capacity of the destination and origin country, the needs of the individual returnee, and the experience and expertise of the partners. And as the number of migrant partners increases, and here it's really important, that brings us to the whole issue of the private sector. The real opportunities exist in the private sector. And that's why it's really important for them to be completely on board in any such initiative. So return, therefore, is sustainable when an individual is successfully reintegrated into the everyday life, the labor market, and the social environment of the country of origin, and has the resilience to deal with the forces that initially drove their migration. Continued mobility after an initial return, including circular migration, may in some cases be more sustainable than a one-time definitive return to the returnees' places of origin. And the most comprehensive definitions of sustainable reintegration go beyond the generation of income. They include a socio-cultural dimension as reflected by networks, participation in local events, self-perception of our personal life with dignity, membership in organizations upon return. It also requires attention to safety and security. That is, perceived safety, trust in the government and the initiatives taken by the government, and adequate awareness about those initiatives, access to justice, access to anti-discrimination remedies, and entitlement of civil and human rights. So that is all, my colleagues and friends. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And it's been indeed a pleasure to be a part of this session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sanjay. Without further ado, I will go directly to the floor. I know that there are quite a few participants here who have played an active role in different ways. I would like to open the floor for some quick interventions, but literally, friends, brothers and sisters, if we could limit that to a minute or less, because I don't want to keep anybody waiting. We have a session that follows immediately after this. And so I'm going to literally call people by their names if they're around. I know that Rameshwar Nepal from Equidem is here. Anisur from Bangladesh is present. Anisur has also left a message in the chat box itself that I think we should all take a look at. I know that Mr. Vijay Padate from the Employers Federation of India is present. Mr. Syed Saiful Haq from Warbi in Bangladesh is also here. So there are quite a few people who are present, and I would certainly think that they have some important perspectives which is worth mentioning. But a minute or less. Rameshwar, your minute starts now.
Thank you, Sabri. So I'll be very, very, very brief, and perhaps I'll be sharing some of the experience that we have. So it is estimated that at least a family member has migrated abroad from 50% of households. That is very massive in our context of Nepal. So and also, while talking about the reintegration, the recent report of Nepal government says that of those returned in last 5 years, only 18% got waged employment, while 39% were unemployed totally. So that shows a very disturbing kind of situation. And while looking at the labor permit issued, so far we have issued 5.8 million new labor approvals, while we issued 2.2 million renewed labor permission to those going abroad repeatedly. So that shows that many people, the millions, are not stopping after coming back to their own country, but again attempting to go abroad. There are some kind of situation, the ground situation, that is leading people to re-migrate again. So for that, we should have some robust type of policy, which is lacking in our context. And it has been years that Nepal government is trying to formulate the policy, but always behind. And similarly, we have a mega project, the employment project, and also several type of employment program. Our constitution guarantees right to employment, and we do have law, and our government already has made announcement that in 5 year time no one has to go abroad for the employment. However, there are nearly 500,000 people migrating abroad. So for that, we need to have robust employment program, support program, and other sort of skill oriented programs. So many other program has to be in place. Otherwise, the migration cycle will be repeated. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Rameshwar. Really appreciate it. I look to some of the other participants if there's anybody else who wants to quickly come in. Vijayji, Saiful Haq, Anisur, is there anybody else apart from the names that I've mentioned who would like to say anything? Please feel free to raise your hands. Saiful Bhai, go ahead. Saiful, can you hear me? You may still be on mute, is it? No, we don't hear you, Saiful. We also have Parvez Siddiqui from Films for Peace. Great to see you here, Parvez. Always a pleasure. Okay, Parvez, why don't you take the floor? Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting Savary. This is a very good, great initiative. I think the last couple of years, the first time on reintegration for the South Asian migrant rights activists is together. We are talking about these important issues. Basically, South Asia, including Bangladesh, we face after conflict in Kuwait, conflict in Iraq and Libya, Bangladesh faced a huge reintegration, for Bangladeshi migrants who have to return in Bangladesh. And at that time, we do not have any reintegration policy and initiative. But after the COVID situation, we face, huge challenges in Bangladesh. But now Bangladesh, with the support of ILO and IOM, they're trying to, drafting a policy for the reintegration. But the problem is we are not inviting migrants for the reintegration policy. So we have to be very careful that if any policy for the migrants, we are going to draft, we have to involve migrants. It should be dropped by the migrants and it should be consulted with the migrants. Otherwise, it will be the not inclusive for the migrants. So in Bangladesh, especially the number of policies that is not connecting to the by migrants, so migrants are always excluded. So I ask very deeply through this consultation that we have, my government always take very important consideration to connect migrants by migrants. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Very well noted. You're right. Migrants have to be included as a part of this broader consultation process. And I think that is certainly happening when you hear about the divisional level consultations in Bangladesh, for instance, and certainly more needs to be done. So point very well noted on that. Saiful Bhai, are you around? Will you be able to take the floor? Because your hand was raised earlier. Not yet. I'll go to Vijayji now, Mr. Vijay Padate from the Employees Federation of India. Yes, sir. Loud and clear, please.
Right. Thank you so much for a very important session. There were multiple presentations from different countries. And what I observed from all these presentations, of course, all these South Asia nations are short on the resources, as we know that. And there is a common thread I notice, which is very encouraging. All these nations are collecting data. They're getting very strong on data management, which will help all the countries to use the scarce resources very, very fruitfully in the interest of migrant workmen. This is a very positive development. Maybe digitization is giving a big boost. And I think which is very, very encouraging to note. With that, I think very heartening to note this. It will definitely help all the migrant workmen, and it will help everything so far as the bottom of the pyramid is concerned.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vijayji. I love the fact that you connected those dots, so that thread that you talk about in terms of the fact that governments are collecting data now, and this is very important to take into consideration. Is there anybody else?
Can you hear me now?
Saiful Bhai, you're finally here. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm facing a problem, technical problem. So I cannot also show my, camera.
Don't worry about it. Just get to the point.
But very quickly, this is very, very, learning for me for the presentation from our partners from the India and also our Bangladesh. Dr. Nasheed Munir also mentioned that we are, drafting a policy, and we are also engaged with this policy drafting. But there is a lot of concerns comes on, which also discussed here, but we should see that, and we also learned that there is a lot of good practices from India. Actually, we heard from them. But basically, I would like to say that, yes, last Parvez mentioned that the migrant workers should be the center of the concern, so they should be, their voice should heard, and we are also trying to bring migrants' voice in this policy as well. But mostly the challenging thing is that we had a lot of policies, a lot of law and acts, but for implementing all those, this is very challenging, and also the resource. So we propose that we need a resource, and we should have some kinds of partnership
Very
between
good.
the country of origin and destination, and also the employers and employees, because employers also can support reintegration of their integration and reintegration both for their workers. So this
Yep.
is also very
Thank you,
important.
sir.
Also, the country of origin and destination should have some kinds
Point
of
well noted.
yeah.
Point well noted.
And finally, I would like to say that the financial institution, they
Saiful
should
Bhai.
also,
Saiful Bhai. Okay, perfect. Got it. Thanks
Okay.
so much.
Thank
I
you.
really need to wrap up now, but before I do that, I think it's important to always recognize if there's any burning questions or comments that anybody wants to really say, and if that is the case, please feel free to raise your hands. I'll give you 10 seconds, 20 seconds, quickly come in. If there's anything that you would like to say. No, I don't see any raised hands, and I don't see anybody wanting to take the floor. Thank you so much. This I think these interventions are very important. I don't mind going back to the panel. We've got 2 minutes, but I'm going to give literally 10 to 20 seconds to everybody. I know that Dr. Nasheed and Surabhi from Bangladesh and India, respectively, have had to leave, but we still have Prasad and Mr. Prasad from EFC, Ratan Bhai from the trade unions in Bangladesh, Professor Bhagat and Sanjay here from IOM. So if there is any quick perspective from your side, please feel free to come in. I'm not going to call on anybody in particular unless you want to come in.
So let me come in with my 10 seconds. Yep. In the Indian context, it's really important for various state governments to step up their efforts, and especially the ones which have been the leading migrant sending states, because obviously they are the states which have also received returning migrants in large numbers. And there is a lot to learn, not only within India from other states, but also from within the South Asia region. Thank you, Shabri.
Thanks so much, Sanjay. That's a good point. Yes.
Yeah, very quick comment that yes, we should think about reintegration, as the word says, the reimagining, not after the return, but before return, at the destination itself, how we can connect the immigrant at destination, and the origin country should connect with, and family also should connect. I think that future.
Perfect. Thank you, Bhagat sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? If not, then of course my segue goes into directly thanking everybody. Just to say this has been an absolutely fantastic session. I've learned a lot myself. I've been scribbling down a lot of notes. There's a whole range of things here that I can go one by one. I particularly I want to take into consideration, because this is a business and human rights forum, I want to take into consideration the perspectives that came from Mr. Prasad and Brother Ratan. Not that the others are not important. The points that were made by Dr. Nasheed, the points that were made by Surabhi from the India Center for Migration, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, Professor Bhagat, all very important. But as a business and human rights forum, in terms of highlighting, there's quite a few elements here in terms of what the two social constituents of the ILO said that I think are very important to take into consideration. I like what Brother Ratan said. They're selling their dreams and they're coming back with empty hands. There's no harm to also look at reintegration really from that people-centered perspective. As we go into the International Migration Review Forum, let us keep in mind the 10 guiding principles. The first guiding principle of the Global Compact for Migration is specifically with regards to being people-centered. So let's keep that in mind. Some of the points that came from everybody was about that, right? In terms of how we need to keep the migrant in mind in the reintegration context. This is not just about labor markets. This is not just about reintegration alone, but some of the other elements are important. With that, I come to a conclusion on this. Thank you so much. There was a whole range of people who are involved in this. I mean, from the ILO, I wouldn't know where to start to thank, but I have to mention Satoshi Sasaki, our deputy director, Amish Karki, who had sleepless nights in doing this, putting this together, Karun Gopinath, Kelvin Sargent, Ravi Perez, Sultan Ahmed, Shubha Gupta, Divya Verma from India, all of them from India, Leticia and Mazhar from Bangladesh, Shehzad from Pakistan, Nishant from Sri Lanka, Neha and Beena from Nepal, from the ILO offices all over the place, and Sanjay and his team in India. Thanks to everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure. Signing off now.
Thank you, Shabri. I'll like to mention my colleague Amit Chaudhary, who has been relentlessly pursuing to have this session, which was really worth having. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So that brings us to a conclusion. And Tandemic team, what a fantastic organization you have had in bringing us together. Over and out.
So, all right. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers and great moderator for that insightful session. So we have a whole variety of interesting side sessions as part of 3rd UN South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights. So please do visit our website. So have a great day, everyone, and have a good rest.
आता सेशन होतं ना ते माझं नव्हतं. माझं सेशन आता सुरू होईल बहुतेक करून. ते किती वाजता सुरू होईल ते बघायला पाहिजे. मुख्य म्हणजे काय, मी जेव्हा जॉईन केलं ना तेव्हा माझ्या पाठी ब्लड नव्हतं. मी बोललो ह्या सेशन मध्ये पण थोडंसं ओके, अर्धा 10 सेकंद बोललो, पण पाठचा ब्लड नव्हतं माझं ॲटमॉस्फिअर. तर वेन इट स्टार्ट्स व्हॉट यू कॅन डू, माझ्या आधी दुसरे स्पीकर्स आहेत, तेव्हा आय विल जॉईन इन अँड यू कॅन डू दॅट. हां, कॅमेरा चालू होता नाही, कॅमेरा बंद होता.